I never thought I'd be sitting here, questioning everything I believed about the people closest to me. But sometimes life has a way of pulling back the curtain on relationships you thought were rock solid, revealing betrayals so deep they leave you breathless. It all started 3 weeks ago when I found a text message that wasn't meant for my eyes. My 16-year-old daughter Emma had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she ran upstairs, and when it buzzed, I glanced over instinctively. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was from my best friend, Sarah Mitchell, and it read, "Don't worry, honey. Your dad and I are working on getting you and your brother out of that situation. Just be patient a little longer." Before I tell you this incredible story, please hit like and subscribe. I'd love to know in the comments which city you're watching from. My name is Margaret Anderson. I'm 52 years old, and I thought I had my life figured out after my divorce 2 years ago. I thought I knew who I could trust. But that single text message shattered everything I believed about my closest friendship and made me realize that my ex-husband David's sudden interest in gaining full custody might not be as random as I'd assumed. Sarah Mitchell has been my best friend for over 15 years. We met when our kids were toddlers at the same daycare, bonded over sleepless nights and teething troubles, and built what I believed was an unshakable friendship. She was my maid of honor, the first person I called when David asked for the divorce, and the shoulder I cried on through every step of rebuilding my life as a single mother. She knew my financial struggles, my fears about the custody arrangement, and every intimate detail of why my marriage fell apart. I trusted her with everything. The betrayal cut so deep because Sarah had been playing both sides perfectly. She'd sit in my living room, bringing me coffee and tissues, listening to me worry about David's increasingly aggressive demands for more time with Emma and her 13-year-old brother Jake. She'd nod sympathetically when I expressed my concerns about his new girlfriend's influence on the kids, and she'd reassure me that any judge would see I was the better parent. But apparently, behind my back, she was feeding information directly to David and somehow convincing my own children that living with their father would be better for them. My daughter Emma is usually my rock. At 16, she's mature beyond her years and has been my closest confidant since the divorce. She understood why I needed to leave her father, supported my decision, and seemed genuinely happy in our new life together. But over the past month, I'd noticed subtle changes. She'd become secretive about her phone, defensive when I asked about her day, and strangely distant during our usual heart-to-heart conversations. I'd attributed it to normal teenage behavior, maybe some stress about college applications. I never imagined that someone I trusted was systematically poisoning her against me. The text message explained everything. Sarah wasn't just offering a sympathetic ear to my daughter's typical teenage frustrations with her mother. She was actively encouraging Emma to see me as the problem, validating every moment of adolescent rebellion, and apparently coordinating with David to present him as the solution to problems I didn't even know existed. My hands were shaking as I set Emma's phone back down. The betrayal felt like a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. How long had this been going on? What had Sarah told them about our private conversations? How much of my personal information had she shared with David to help him build his case for full custody? I needed to talk to someone, but the person I would normally call in a crisis was Sarah herself. The isolation hit me like a slap. Who else knew? Was I the only one blind to what was happening in my own family? That's when I thought of my brother Michael Anderson. At 48, he's always been my voice of reason, the steady presence who helped me navigate the divorce and rebuild my confidence. Michael lives just 20 minutes away and has remained neutral in all the drama with David, focusing instead on being the best uncle he could be to Emma and Jake. If anyone could help me think through this situation clearly, it would be him. I also realized I needed to reach out to Patricia Williams, my colleague at the accounting firm where I work. Patricia and I have grown close over the past year, bonding over our shared experiences as single mothers trying to balance career and family. She's practical, honest, and has no connection to my history with David or Sarah. If I was going to figure out how to handle this betrayal, I needed someone with fresh eyes and no emotional investment in protecting my feelings. The worst part was realizing how skillfully I'd been manipulated. Every conversation with Sarah over the past few months took on a new, sinister meaning. When she'd ask detailed questions about my finances, I thought she was being supportive. When she'd probe about my dating life or work stress, I assumed she cared about my happiness. When she'd spend extra time with Emma and Jake, taking them for ice cream or movies, I was grateful for the help. Now I understood she was gathering intelligence and building relationships with my children that undermined my authority as their mother. I spent that entire evening replaying conversations, looking for clues I'd missed. Sarah had been so subtle, so careful. She never directly criticized me in front of the kids, but I began to remember moments when she'd make little comments. "Your mom works so hard, maybe too hard sometimes." Or, "It must be difficult for you kids, adjusting to all these changes." Innocent enough on the surface, but designed to plant seeds of doubt. The betrayal was devastating, but what terrified me most was realizing how effective their strategy had been. If Emma was texting with Sarah about wanting to live with her father, how far had this plan already progressed? Were there legal documents being prepared? Had David been building a case against me using information Sarah provided? The thought of losing my children because my best friend had systematically sabotaged me was almost too much to bear. And that's when the pattern snapped into place. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate at work. Every few minutes, I found myself staring at my phone, wondering if I should call Michael immediately or wait until I had more concrete evidence. The uncertainty was eating away at me, but I knew I needed to be smart about this. David had always been methodical, and if he was building a case against me, I couldn't afford to react emotionally. When I picked up Emma and Jake from school that afternoon, I watched their faces more carefully than usual. Jake bounced into the car with his typical 8-year-old energy, chattering about his math test and the kickball game at recess. But Emma slid into the passenger seat with that distant expression I'd been seeing more often lately. "How was your day, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Fine," Emma replied, not looking up from her phone. In the rearview mirror, I caught Jake rolling his eyes. "Emma's been weird all week, Mom. She keeps texting someone and won't tell me who." My heart skipped. "Oh, anyone I know?" Emma finally looked up, a flash of something that might have been guilt crossing her face. "Just a friend from school." I knew she was lying, but I also knew that pushing too hard right now would only make her retreat further. Instead, I focused on Jake's enthusiastic recap of his day, all while my mind raced with questions about what Sarah might have told my daughter. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I finally called Michael. He answered on the second ring, and just hearing his familiar voice made some of the tension leave my shoulders. "Margaret, everything okay? You sound stressed." I took a deep breath. "Michael, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting, okay?" "Of course. What's going on?" I told him everything. About finding Emma's phone, about the messages with Sarah, about my growing suspicion that my best friend was working with David against me. Michael listened in silence, and I could picture him in his kitchen, probably leaning against the counter with that focused expression he got when he was processing something serious. When I finished, there was a long pause. Finally, Michael spoke. his voice careful and measured. Margaret, this is serious. If Sarah really is feeding information to David, and if Emma is starting to express preferences about custody, you need to document everything. But more importantly, you need to find out exactly what's been said to the kids. How do I do that without making Emma feel like I'm interrogating her? Maybe don't start with Emma. Jake's younger, more open. He might not even realize he's sharing important information. Michael was right. Jake had never been good at keeping secrets, and he adored his uncle. If Sarah had been planting seeds with both children, Jake might reveal things without understanding their significance. The next day was Saturday, and I decided to take both kids to the park, where Michael often brought his own energy for weekend soccer practice. It felt natural, unforced, and gave me a chance to observe how they interacted when they thought I wasn't paying close attention. Jake ran ahead to the playground equipment while Emma lingered by the car, still glued to her phone. I sat on a nearby bench and watched my son climb the monkey bars with determined concentration. After a few minutes, I called him over. Jake, can I ask you something? He jogged over, slightly out of breath. Sure, Mom. You mentioned yesterday that Emma's been acting different. Have you noticed anything else strange lately? Jake plopped down beside me, his expression becoming surprisingly serious for an 8-year-old. Well, Sarah's been asking us lots of questions when you're not around. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice casual. What kind of questions? Like, are we happy living with you? And do we miss Dad? And stuff like that? Emma always gets mad when I tell her we're fine, but Sarah keeps asking anyway. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. When does Sarah ask these questions? Usually when she picks us up from school or when we're at her house. She says she's just checking on us because she cares, but... Jake paused, kicking at the gravel with his sneaker. It feels weird, Mom, like she wants us to say something specific. Out of the mouths of babes. Even at 8, Jake had sensed something wasn't right about Sarah's interrogations. Has she ever suggested that you might be happier living somewhere else? Jake nodded slowly. She talks about Dad's apartment a lot. How much space it has, and how he misses us, and how maybe it would be good for us to spend more time there? I felt sick, but I forced myself to ask one more question. What does Emma say when Sarah brings up your father? That's when Emma gets all quiet and starts texting. Sarah always seems happy when that happens. The picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing. Sarah wasn't just gathering information. She was actively working to undermine the children's contentment with our current arrangement. And she was being strategic about it, targeting Emma's adolescent need for independence and complexity, while using Jake's innocence to gauge the effectiveness of her manipulation. That evening, I knew I had to confront Emma directly. I found her in her room, supposedly doing homework, but actually scrolling through her phone. I knocked on her doorframe and asked if we could talk. I'm busy, Mom. Emma, this is important. She sighed dramatically, but set her phone aside. I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. I've been noticing that you seem unhappy lately, and I want to understand what's going on. Emma's eyes darted away from mine. Nothing's going on. Jake mentioned that Sarah has been asking you both some questions about how you're feeling. Do you want to talk about that? For a moment, I thought she might open up. Her expression softened, and she looked like the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was upset. But then her walls went back up. Sarah cares about us, Mom. She's worried that we're not okay after the divorce. And are you not okay? Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. I don't know. Sometimes I think it might be easier if Jake and I lived with Dad. His place is bigger, and he doesn't have to work as much as you do. There it was. Sarah had been systematically planting doubts about our life together, highlighting every stress and limitation, while painting David's situation as more stable and appealing. The betrayal was even more complete than I'd realized. But as I sat there looking at my daughter's confused and conflicted face, I realized something crucial. Emma wasn't happier with the idea of living with David. She was just overwhelmed and looking for a solution to problems that Sarah had convinced her existed. That's when my phone buzzed with a text message, and I saw Sarah's name on the screen. The message was brief, but chilling. David wants to meet tomorrow to discuss the custody arrangement. I think it's time. I stared at the text message from Sarah, my hands trembling slightly. The casual tone, the assumption that she had the right to coordinate meetings about my children's future, made my stomach turn. Emma noticed my expression change. "Mom, what's wrong?" I looked at my daughter, sitting cross-legged on her bed, her homework forgotten. She looked so young despite her attempts at teenage sophistication. I made a decision that went against every protective instinct I had, but I knew it was necessary. "Emma, I need to show you something, but first, I need you to promise me you'll listen with an open mind." Her eyebrows furrowed. "Okay." I turned my phone screen toward her, showing Sarah's text message. Emma read it, and I watched confusion flicker across her face. "I don't understand. Why is Sarah texting you about Dad?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out, sweetheart. Can you tell me exactly what Sarah has been saying to you about living arrangements?" Emma shifted uncomfortably, pulling a pillow into her lap. "She just asks how we're doing. Like, if we have enough space here, if we miss Dad's house, stuff like that." "And what do you tell her?" "The truth, I guess. Sometimes I do miss having my own bathroom, and Dad's neighborhood is quieter." Emma's voice grew smaller. "Sarah said it's normal to want things to be easier." I felt a flash of anger, but I kept my voice gentle. "Emma, has Sarah ever suggested that you should tell your father you want to live with him?" The way Emma's eyes widened told me everything I needed to know, but she still tried to deflect. "Not exactly." "What exactly then?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, picking at the pillowcase. "She said that if Jake and I were unhappy, we should speak up. That Dad would want to know if we needed more stability." "Did she use that word? Stability?" "Yeah." Emma looked up at me, and I could see the confusion and guilt warring in her expression. "Mom, I never said I was unhappy. I just said sometimes things are hard here because you work so much and Jake gets scared at night sometimes." My heart broke a little. These were normal childhood concerns, the kind of everyday struggles that every family faces, but Sarah had twisted them into ammunition against me. "Emma, do you remember what I taught you about the difference between a friend and someone who pretends to be a friend? A real friend wants what's best for you, not what's best for them," Emma recited. "Right, so I need you to think carefully about this. When Sarah asks you these questions about your dad's house and suggests you might be happier there, how do you feel afterward?" Emma considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Confused, I guess. Like maybe I'm not seeing things right. Like maybe I should be more upset about the divorce than I am." "And is that how you normally feel about our life here?" "No." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "I mean, I wish some things were different, but I don't want to leave you, Mom. I never said I wanted to live with Dad full time." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Emma, I think Sarah has been manipulating you. And Jake too." "But why would she do that?" It was the question I'd been dreading, because the answer was so ugly and complicated. I think she's been working with your father to build a case that you'd be better off living with him? Emma's face went through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, then a growing realization. She's been lying to me? I think she's been twisting your normal feelings and concerns to serve her own purpose. Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Mom, I feel so stupid. You're not stupid, sweetheart. You trusted someone I trusted. Someone I brought into our lives. This isn't your fault. What are we going to do? Before I could answer, Jake appeared in the doorway, his hair messy from sleep. Why is everyone talking? I heard Emma crying. I looked at my two children and realized this conversation needed to include both of them. Come here, Jake. We need to have a family meeting. Jake climbed onto the bed, settling between Emma and me. I took a deep breath and tried to figure out how to explain betrayal to a 7-year-old. Remember how we talked about how Sarah has been asking you questions about Dad's house? Jake nodded solemnly. Yeah, she always seems really interested in my answers. Well, I found out that Sarah has been sharing your answers with your father, and not in a good way. Like tattling? Jake asked. Sort of like tattling, but worse. She's been trying to make it sound like you're unhappy here, so that your dad might try to have you live with him all the time instead of just on weekends. Jake's face scrunched up in confusion and distress. But I don't want to live with Dad all the time. I like our house. I like my room here. I like that you make pancakes on Saturday mornings. Emma reached over and hugged her little brother. Jake, did Sarah ever tell you that you should ask Dad if you could live with him? She said if I ever felt sad or scared here, I should tell Dad about it. She said Dad would know how to make it better. I felt sick. Sarah had been so calculated, so patient in her manipulation. She'd been building a narrative of 2 unhappy children with a mother who couldn't provide adequately for them. What are we going to do about Sarah? Emma asked. First, I'm going to tell her that neither your father nor she gets to arrange meetings about your future without involving me properly. Then I'm going to make it very clear that she's no longer welcome in our lives. Are you going to tell Dad what she's been doing? Emma asked. It was a complicated question. David might be planning to use the information Sarah had given him, but he might not know how she'd obtained it, or how she'd manipulated the children to get it. I'm going to have an honest conversation with your father about what's been happening. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. David is worried about the kids. We should all meet this weekend to discuss what's best for them. I showed the message to Emma, who read it and shook her head in disgust. She really thinks she gets to decide what's best for us? Not anymore, she doesn't. I began typing a response to Sarah, my children watching over my shoulder. Sarah, I know what you've been doing. We need to talk immediately. Come over tonight. Emma looked at me with surprise. You're going to confront her here? I want her to see you two when I tell her exactly how her manipulation has affected this family, and I want you both to hear her explanation for yourself. Jake looked worried. Will there be yelling? I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever happens, we're going to face it together as a family. My phone buzzed with Sarah's response. I don't know what you mean. I'm only trying to help. I'll be there in an hour. Even now, she was still pretending innocence. I looked at my children, both of them watching me with a mixture of anxiety and trust. And I realized that this confrontation would determine not just the future of my relationship with Sarah, but whether David would succeed in his apparent attempt to change our custody arrangement. And that's when the pattern snapped into place. The hour crawled by like molasses. I found myself cleaning the same kitchen counter 3 times, my hands needing something to do, while my mind raced through everything I wanted to say to Sarah. The late afternoon sun slanted through our living room windows, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness that had crept into our lives. Emma sat curled up on the couch, pretending to read but clearly watching me pace. Jake had retreated to his favorite spot on the floor near the bookshelf, building an elaborate tower with his blocks, though I noticed he kept glancing toward the front door. The familiar sounds of our home felt different now, charged with anticipation and dread. "Mom, you're making me nervous," Emma finally said, closing her book. "Maybe you should sit down." I tried to settle into the armchair across from her, but my leg bounced restlessly. I keep thinking about all the time she was here. All those conversations where she seemed so concerned, so supportive. How did I miss what she was really doing? "Because she was your friend," Emma said simply. "You trusted her." The word "was" hung in the air between us. Past tense. Because whatever Sarah had been to me, whatever our friendship had meant, it felt irreparably broken now. Jake's block tower toppled over, the wooden pieces scattering across the hardwood floor with a series of sharp clicks. He didn't immediately start rebuilding like he usually did. Instead, he sat there staring at the mess. "Sometimes things just fall down," he said quietly, and I wondered if he was talking about more than blocks. At exactly 6 o'clock, Sarah's car pulled into our driveway. Through the front window, I watched her gather her purse, check her appearance in the rearview mirror, and walk up our front path with the same confident stride she'd had hundreds of times before. But everything felt different now, tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. The doorbell rang, though she usually just knocked and walked in. Maybe she sensed the shift too. I opened the door to find Sarah standing on our front porch, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the early evening light. She wore a concerned expression that looked genuine, and for a moment I felt a flicker of doubt. Could I have misunderstood? Could there be some other explanation? "Hi," she said softly, stepping inside when I moved back from the doorway. "You sounded upset in your text. What's going on?" She looked around the living room where Emma and Jake sat watching her, and something in her demeanor shifted slightly. Her smile became more forced. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind her. The sound felt final, like the end of something important. Sarah perched on the edge of the couch, maintaining that look of innocent concern. "Of course. You know I'm always here for you. What's wrong?" The casual way she said it, as if she genuinely had no idea why I might be upset, made my anger flare. But I forced myself to stay calm. I wanted to hear what she would say, how far she would take this performance. "The children told me about some conversations they've had with you," I began, watching her face carefully. "About their father. About whether they're happy living here." A slight tightening around her eyes was the only sign that she understood where this was heading. "Oh, that. I hope you don't think I was overstepping. I just care about Emma and Jake so much, and sometimes kids need a neutral adult to talk to." "Neutral?" Emma repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. Sarah's gaze flicked to Emma, then back to me. "Children sometimes feel like they can't be completely honest with their parents. They don't want to hurt your feelings. I just wanted them to know they could share their real feelings with someone." "And then you shared those feelings with David," I said. The mask slipped then, just for a moment. Sarah's composed expression faltered, and I saw something calculating flash across her face before she recovered. "David is their father? If the kids were struggling, don't you think he had a right to know?" You told him I couldn't afford Jake's medicine, I said, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. You told him I was overwhelmed and stressed. You painted a picture of our life that wasn't true. Sarah straightened her shoulders, and suddenly the pretense of innocent concern began to crumble. Maybe it was more true than you want to admit. Maybe you've been so busy trying to prove you could handle everything alone that you haven't been honest about how hard things really are. Jake made a small sound from his spot on the floor, and I saw him curl up tighter against the bookshelf. Emma immediately got up and sat down next to him, putting her arm around his shoulders. That's not your decision to make, I said. Those aren't your children. No, but they're David's children too, Sarah replied, and now her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. And maybe he's in a better position to provide for them right now. The room fell completely silent except for the tick of the clock on the mantel. Emma and Jake stared at Sarah with expressions of shock and hurt that made my heart ache. How long? I asked. How long have you been planning this with him? Sarah stood up, her purse clutched tightly in her hands. The friendly mask was completely gone now, replaced by something cold and determined. David reached out to me a few months ago. He was concerned about the kids, about whether the divorce had been too hard on them. He asked me to keep an eye on things, to let him know if they seemed to be struggling. And you decided they were struggling? Emma said, her voice sharp with anger. You decided our mom wasn't good enough. Sarah looked at Emma with something that might have been pity. Honey, your mom is doing her best, but sometimes best isn't enough. Your dad can give you things she can't. Stability, security, a future without so much uncertainty. I felt something break inside me, some last thread of the friendship we'd once shared. This woman, standing in my living room, talking about my inadequacy as a mother, while my children listened, was a stranger. Get out, I said quietly. You're making a mistake, Sarah said, but she was already moving toward the door. David's lawyers are going to file for a custody modification anyway. I was trying to help you handle this quietly, for the kids' sake. She paused at the door, looking back at all of us with an expression I couldn't quite read. This isn't over, she said, and then she was gone. The silence that followed felt deafening. Emma and Jake both looked at me with wide eyes, as if seeing their mother in a completely new light, and I realized that everything Sarah had just revealed meant our real battle was only beginning. After Sarah left, the three of us sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jake had pulled his knees up to his chest, and Emma kept running her hands through her hair the way she did when she was trying to process something difficult. Mom, Emma finally said, her voice smaller than usual. Is what she said true about Dad's lawyers? I moved to sit on the floor next to them, my back against the couch. I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out together. I don't want to live with Dad, Jake said suddenly, his words muffled against his knees. He doesn't even know that I hate mushrooms on pizza anymore, and his apartment smells like that weird air freshener. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Leave it to Jake to focus on the practical details that mattered to him. What I don't understand, Emma said, is why Sarah would do this. She's been coming over for months, eating our food, complaining about her job, borrowing your books. She seemed like she actually cared about us. That was the part that hurt the most. I kept replaying conversations we'd had, looking for signs I'd missed. All those times she'd asked how the kids were adjusting, how I was managing financially, whether I ever felt overwhelmed. I'd thought she was being supportive, but she'd been gathering ammunition. People aren't always who we think they are, I said, though the words felt inadequate. Jake lifted his head and looked at me with those serious eyes that made him seem older than his 10 years. Are you scared, Mom? The honest answer was yes. I was terrified, but I also knew that admitting that wouldn't help anyone right now. I'm worried, I said instead. But I'm also angry, and that's going to help us fight this. Emma shifted position so she was facing me directly. What are we going to do? First, I need to call a lawyer. Then we need to talk about what Sarah might have told your father and what the truth actually is. Like what? Jake asked. I took a deep breath. This wasn't a conversation I'd wanted to have with them so directly, but Sarah had forced my hand. Well, she mentioned that you both seemed stressed about the divorce. Is that true? Emma and Jake exchanged a look that told me they'd discussed this between themselves before. We were sad, Emma said carefully, especially at first. And sometimes Jake had nightmares for a while. But that doesn't mean we want to live with Dad, Jake added quickly. It just meant we were sad about everything changing. And you, Mom, Emma continued. You did cry sometimes, especially right after Dad moved out. And you were really tired a lot. I nodded. Of course they'd noticed. Kids always noticed more than adults gave them credit for. Those are normal things to feel when a family goes through a big change, I said. But Sarah apparently interpreted them as signs that you'd be better off somewhere else. That's stupid, Jake said with more vehemence than I'd heard from him in months. We're not better off without you. We're better off without Dad making you cry all the time. Emma reached over and squeezed his hand. Remember how tense dinner used to be when they were still together? When Dad would criticize everything and Mom would just get quieter and quieter? I was surprised they'd picked up on that dynamic so clearly. David had never yelled or created dramatic scenes, but his constant subtle criticisms had been exhausting. Apparently, they'd been exhausting for the kids to witness, too. So, what do we do now? Emma asked again. Before I could answer, Jake stood up abruptly. I want to call Dad myself. Jake, I don't think that's a good idea right now. No, Mom. I want to tell him that Sarah is wrong. I want to tell him that we're happy here and we don't want things to change again. Emma was nodding. He should hear it from us directly, not just from Sarah or lawyers or whatever. I felt a mix of pride and protectiveness watching them. They were being braver than I felt, but I also worried about putting them in the middle of an adult conflict. Let me think about it, I said. Maybe we can arrange a conversation, but I want to be prepared first. Emma got up and started pacing around the living room, her mind clearly working through possibilities. What if Sarah tries to talk to us at school or something? She asked. What if she shows up here again when you're not home? That thought hadn't occurred to me, and it sent a chill down my spine. Sarah knew our routines, our schedules, when the kids would be home alone for the brief period between school ending and my return from work. We don't talk to her, Jake said firmly, about anything. But what if she tries to make it seem like she's just checking on us? Emma asked. What if she acts like everything is normal? I realized my children were having to strategize against someone who had been like family to us just an hour ago. The violation of trust felt overwhelming. We stick together, I said, and we tell each other everything. No secrets, no matter how small something might seem. Emma stopped pacing and looked at me directly. Does that include you, Mom? Because sometimes you try to protect us by not telling us things, but today proved that's not always better. She was right. I'd been trying to shield them from the worst of the divorce aftermath, but Sarah's betrayal had shown that my children were more aware and more capable than I'd been giving them credit for. You're right, I admitted. We're all in this together. Jake came over and hugged me, something he'd been doing less frequently as he got older. We're not going anywhere, Mom, even if Dad's lawyers are really scary. Emma joined the hug, and for a moment I felt like maybe we could handle whatever came next. Then the phone rang, and I saw David's name on the caller ID, and I realized our real conversation was about to begin. I stared at David's name flashing on the phone screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The kids were still in our group hug, but I could feel them tense up as they heard the ringtone. "Should I answer it?" I asked them. "Yes," Emma said immediately. "We said we're doing this together, right? Put it on speaker." Jake nodded, though he looked nervous. "We want to hear what he has to say." I took a deep breath and accepted the call, hitting the speaker button. "Hello, David." "Claire?" His voice sounded strained, different from our usual post-divorce conversations. "We need to talk." "I figured we would, especially after Sarah's visit today." There was a pause on his end. "So you know." "I know that my best friend has been secretly working with you to build a case against me. I know she's been reporting back to you about my parenting and our lives here. What I don't know is why you thought that was necessary." "Claire, listen to me. This isn't about hurting you or playing games. I'm genuinely concerned about the kids." Emma stepped closer to the phone, her jaw set with determination I recognized from when she was much younger and refused to back down from an argument. "Dad, we're here too. We can hear you." Another pause. "Emma? Jake? You're both there?" "We're both here," Jake said, his voice steadier than I expected. "And we wanted to talk to you ourselves." "Okay," David said slowly. "That's actually good. I want to hear from you both." Emma jumped in first. "Dad, Sarah told Mom that you think we're not being taken care of properly, but that's not true. We're doing really well here." "Emma, I know you love your mom, but sometimes kids don't see the whole picture." "What picture?" Jake asked. "What exactly do you think is wrong with how we're living?" I watched my children stand up for our family, and I felt both proud and heartbroken that they had to. David's voice became more careful. "Sarah mentioned that you're home alone sometimes after school, that your mom works late hours, that maybe there isn't enough structure." "That's garbage," Emma said, and I didn't correct her language. "I'm 14, Dad. I can handle being home for an hour after school. And Mom doesn't work late hours. She's here for dinner every single night." "And we have tons of structure," Jake added. "Homework time, chores, family dinners." "Just because Sarah doesn't like how we do things doesn't mean we're doing them wrong." I could hear David breathing on the other end of the line. "Sarah cares about you both. She's been worried." "No, Dad." Emma's voice got sharper. "Sarah hasn't been worried about us. She's been spying on us. Do you know how that feels? To find out someone you trusted was reporting everything about your life to someone else?" "That's not how it was." "Then how was it?" Jake asked. "Because from where we're sitting, it feels like you asked Mom's best friend to watch us and tell you if Mom messed up." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd lost the connection. Finally, David spoke again. "I didn't ask Sarah to spy on anyone. She came to me because she was concerned. She thought maybe the kids needed more stability." "But you listened to her instead of talking to us directly," I said, finding my voice again. "David, we've been doing shared custody for 2 years. If you had concerns about how things were going here, you could have talked to me. Or to Emma and Jake. But instead, you went behind my back. I didn't want to create conflict." Emma actually laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Well, that worked out great." "Emma," I said gently. "No, Mom, it's true. Dad, you created way more conflict by doing it this way. And you made Sarah betray Mom's friendship. How is that better than just having an honest conversation? I heard David sigh deeply. Maybe you're right. Maybe I handled this wrong. Maybe? Jake's voice cracked a little with emotion. Dad, we thought you were happy with how things were. We thought you trusted Mom. We thought we had finally found a good way to be a family, even though we're divorced. You do, David said quietly. I mean, you did. I do trust your mom. Then why did you believe Sarah over trusting what you already knew? Emma asked. It was such a mature question, one that cut right to the heart of the issue. I found myself genuinely curious about his answer. Sarah painted a picture that scared me, David admitted. She made it sound like you were raising yourselves while your mom was distracted by work and other things. What other things? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She said you were dating someone who was around the kids a lot. Emma and Jake both looked at me with confused expressions. David, I'm not dating anyone, I said slowly. I haven't dated anyone since our divorce was finalized. But Sarah said... Sarah was wrong, Emma interrupted. Dad, Mom doesn't date. She barely even goes out with friends except for Sarah, and now that's obviously over. She said there was a guy who came around for dinner regularly, someone the kids called by his first name. Jake suddenly started laughing. Oh my God, Dad, are you talking about Mr. Peterson from next door? His first name is Tom. He brings us vegetables from his garden sometimes, and Mom invites him to stay for dinner because his wife died last year and he's lonely. He's like 70 years old, Emma added. And he talks about his dead wife the entire time he's here? I felt a mixture of relief and anger. David, Sarah took a lonely widower getting invited for dinner occasionally and turned it into me having a boyfriend around the kids. How does that not raise red flags for you about the reliability of her information? It does now, he said quietly. What else did she tell you? I asked. Because clearly, we need to sort through what's actually happening versus what Sarah interpreted or imagined. There was another long pause. She said the kids seemed stressed when she visited, that Emma was being too responsible for her age, basically taking care of Jake. Emma rolled her eyes. I help Jake with homework sometimes because I'm good at math and he's not. That's called being a big sister, not raising him. And she said Jake seemed anxious about disappointing you, Claire. That he was worried about not being good enough. Jake frowned. I mean, I want Mom to be proud of me, but that's normal, right? I want you to be proud of me too, Dad. I realized Sarah had taken normal family dynamics and twisted them into evidence of dysfunction. The thought of how calculated that had been made my stomach turn. David, I said carefully, did it occur to you that Sarah might have her own motivations for wanting our current arrangement to change? What do you mean? Emma and Jake were both looking at me, clearly wondering the same thing. I mean, what does Sarah gain if you get more custody of the kids? The question hung in the air, and I realized I was about to voice a suspicion that would change everything about how we all saw this situation. Sarah's been talking about how much she misses having kids around, I said slowly, pieces clicking into place. She's been talking about how she and Mark want to be more involved in Emma and Jake's lives. She's mentioned several times how nice it would be if the kids spent more time at your house because it's closer to where she lives. The silence on David's end was deafening. Emma's eyes widened. Mom, do you think Sarah wants Dad to get custody so she can play mom to us? And suddenly, everything about Sarah's behavior over the past few months made terrible, perfect sense. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, and I could feel the weight of this realization settling over all of us. My mind was racing. connecting dots I should have seen months ago. How had I been so blind to what Sarah was really doing? "Oh my God," I whispered, sinking deeper into the couch cushions. "She's been grooming all of us for this. Every conversation, every visit, every piece of advice." Emma shifted closer to me, her young face showing an understanding far beyond her years. "Mom, remember when Sarah kept talking about how she never got to have the full mom experience because she doesn't have kids? And how she always says Jake and I are like the children she never had?" Jake nodded eagerly, clearly relieved to finally understand what had been bothering him. "And she's always trying to tell me what to do, like she's my actual mom. It makes me uncomfortable, but I thought I was being mean for not liking it." "You weren't being mean, honey," I assured him, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "That feeling you had was your instinct telling you something was wrong." David's voice came through the phone, strained and hollow. "Claire, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I fell for this. When she talked about the kids, she seemed so caring, so concerned about their well-being." "She was concerned," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "Concerned about positioning herself as their primary female influence? Think about it, David. Every problem she identified had the same solution: more time at your house, where she has access to them." I stood up and started pacing, the full scope of Sarah's manipulation becoming clearer with each step. Emma and Jake watched me, their expressions a mixture of concern and fascination as they witnessed me piece together the puzzle. "She volunteered to help with carpools to get closer to them," I continued. "She offered to babysit so she could play house. She criticized my parenting to undermine my confidence and make me doubt myself. And she fed you just enough twisted truth to make her lies believable." "Mom," Emma said quietly, "do you think she planned this whole thing from the beginning? Like, when she first became friends with you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I stopped pacing and looked at my daughter, seeing my own fears reflected in her eyes. Had my entire friendship with Sarah been built on deception? "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe it started innocent and evolved into something else. Or maybe she saw an opportunity when she realized David and I were divorced and I was struggling as a single mom." Jake looked confused. "But why would she want to take us away from you? We're happy here." "Because she wants to be a mother," David said from the phone, his voice thick with guilt. "And she saw you two as the easiest path to that. I'm so ashamed, kids. I should have questioned her motives instead of just believing everything she told me." I felt a surge of protective anger, not just at Sarah, but at myself for allowing this to happen. The worst part is how she used our trust against us. She knew I valued her friendship, so I shared my insecurities and struggles with her. "She used that information as ammunition. What are we going to do?" Emma asked, and I could hear the worry in her voice despite her attempt to sound mature. I sat back down between my children, drawing strength from their presence. "We're going to handle this as a family. Your dad and I are going to have a very serious conversation about Sarah's role in your lives going forward." "I've already decided," David said firmly. "Sarah won't be having any contact with the kids anymore. And Claire, I owe you more than an apology. I need to make this right." But even as he spoke those words, I realized we were far from out of the woods. Sarah wasn't just going to disappear quietly. She'd invested too much time and energy into this plan to simply walk away. "David," I said, a chill running down my spine, "what exactly did you promise Sarah about spending time with the kids if you got more custody?" The long pause that followed told me everything I needed to know, and I realized our biggest confrontation with Sarah was still ahead of us. The silence stretched so long, I could hear the kids breathing beside me. Finally, David's voice came through the phone, barely above a whisper. I told her she could be part of their lives, a real part, like a stepmother. The words hit me like ice water. Emma's hand found mine, squeezing tight, while Jake shifted closer to my other side. David, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Please tell me you didn't promise to marry her. Not exactly, but I let her believe we were heading in that direction. She kept talking about how we could be a real family, how she could give the kids the stability they needed. She made it sound so logical, so right. I closed my eyes, feeling the full scope of Sarah's manipulation. She hadn't just been working to take my children away from me. She'd been positioning herself to replace me entirely. Mom, Emma said quietly, what if she doesn't accept Dad's decision? What if she keeps trying? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. My blood ran cold when I saw Sarah's name on the screen. She's texting me, I announced, and the living room fell completely silent. I opened the message and read it aloud. We need to talk. I know David called you. There are things you don't understand about what's best for Emma and Jake. She's not giving up, Jake said, his voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. David's voice came through the phone speaker, tight with worry. Claire, maybe you shouldn't respond. Maybe we should just ignore her. But I was already typing back. There's nothing to discuss, Sarah. Stay away from my family. Her response came immediately. Your family? I've been more of a mother to those children in the past year than you have. Ask them who helped with homework every week. Ask them who listened to their problems. Emma made a small sound of distress, and I realized Sarah was right about one thing. She had inserted herself so completely into our lives that her sudden absence would leave a void. Kids, I said, turning to face them both. I need you to be honest with me. How do you feel about Sarah not being around anymore? Emma bit her lip before answering. I'm confused, Mom. She did help me with things, and she seemed to really care. But now knowing she was working against you this whole time, it makes everything feel fake. Jake nodded. It's like finding out your favorite teacher was only nice to you because they wanted something from your parents. It makes you question everything they ever said. My phone buzzed again. This time, Sarah had sent, I'm coming over. We're going to settle this face to face. David, I said quickly, she's coming here. What should I do? I'm on my way too, he replied immediately. Don't let her in until I get there. But as I looked out the front window, I could already see Sarah's car pulling into my driveway. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, and even from this distance, I could see the determined set of her shoulders. She's here, I whispered. Emma and Jake moved to the window beside me, and we watched as Sarah stepped out of her car, smoothed her hair, and began walking toward our front door with the confident stride of someone who still believed she held all the cards. The doorbell rang, and my heart started pounding as I realized this confrontation would determine not just our immediate safety, but the entire future of my family. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. I stood frozen at the window, watching Sarah shift her weight from foot to foot on my front porch. She had that look I'd seen before when she was determined to get her way. The same expression she'd worn when convincing me to let her take the kids to that expensive summer camp I couldn't afford. Mom, what do we do? Emma whispered, moving closer to me. We don't answer, I said firmly, stepping back from the window. David said to wait for him. But Sarah wasn't giving up. She knocked loudly and called out, Claire, I know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway. We need to talk about this like adults. Jake shook his head. She's acting like nothing happened. Like we didn't just find out she's been plotting against us this whole time. I pulled out my phone and quickly texted David. How far away are you? She's not leaving. His response came back immediately. 5 minutes. Don't engage until I'm there. Sarah's voice carried through the door again, softer this time, almost pleading. Emma? Jake? I know this is confusing for you both, but I care about you so much. Everything I did was because I love you. Emma's face crumpled slightly, and I could see the internal battle playing out in her expression. Despite everything we'd discovered, Sarah had been a constant presence in her life for over a year. She sounds so normal, Emma said quietly. How did I not see what she was really doing? Because she's good at manipulation, I replied, putting my arm around my daughter. That's how people like Sarah operate. They make themselves indispensable while working their own agenda. The knocking stopped, and for a moment I hoped Sarah had given up. But then I heard the sound of footsteps moving around the side of the house. She's going to the back door, Jake said, his voice tight with anxiety. We hurried through the house, and sure enough, we could see Sarah through the kitchen window, testing the back door handle. When she found it locked, she cupped her hands against the glass and peered inside. My phone buzzed with another text from her. I can see you in the kitchen. This is ridiculous. I'm not leaving until we talk. She's not going away, Emma said, wrapping her arms around herself. What if she tries to break in or something? She won't, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. The Sarah I thought I knew would never do something like that, but the Sarah I thought I knew also wouldn't have conspired with my ex-husband against me. The sound of another car in the driveway made us all exhale with relief. Through the front window, I could see David getting out of his car, his expression grim as he spotted Sarah's vehicle. Thank God, I breathed. We watched as David approached the front door where Sarah was now standing again. Even from inside, we could see her straighten up, putting on what I now recognized as her performing face. David, we heard her say through the door. I'm glad you're here. Maybe you can help Claire see reason. The only reasonable thing here is for you to leave, David replied firmly. You've done enough damage. Damage? Sarah's voice rose slightly. I've been helping this family for over a year. I've been there for Emma and Jake when Claire was too wrapped up in her own problems to see what they needed. Emma flinched at those words, and I felt a surge of protective anger. David's voice remained steady. By gathering information to use against Claire in court? That's your idea of helping? There was a pause before Sarah responded, and when she did, her tone had shifted to something I'd never heard from her before. Cold and calculating. Those children deserve stability, David. They deserve a father who can provide for them properly, and a mother who isn't constantly struggling just to keep up. The mask was finally coming off completely. Hearing Sarah's cold words about my children's needs, about what they deserved, felt like a physical blow. The woman I had trusted with my deepest fears and insecurities was now using them as weapons, standing on my doorstep and declaring me an inadequate mother to anyone who would listen. I pressed my hand against the wall, needing something solid to anchor myself. Emma moved closer to me, her face pale but determined. Jake stood by the window, his jaw clenched in a way that reminded me painfully of his father. You don't know what you're talking about, Sarah, David said from outside. These kids are loved and cared for. Claire has built a good life for them. A good life? Sarah's laugh was bitter, nothing like the warm sound I'd grown accustomed to over the past year. Living paycheck to paycheck? moving them from their father's house into a cramped apartment. I've watched Claire struggle every day, watched her cry over bills she couldn't pay while pretending everything was fine. Each word felt like a betrayal. Those tears she mentioned, those vulnerable moments when I'd broken down about money or felt overwhelmed by single parenthood, she'd been collecting them all like evidence. Every coffee date where I'd confided my fears, every evening she'd stayed late because I was too proud to admit I needed help, every time she'd offered to watch the kids when I had to work late, it had all been gathering ammunition for Mark's custody case. "Mom," Emma whispered, taking my hand. "Don't listen to her. She's wrong about everything." But the terrible thing was, some of what Sarah was saying contained threads of truth. I had cried over bills. I had struggled. I had made sacrifices and compromises that weren't always perfect. The difference was, I had done it all out of love for my children, while Sarah had watched and cataloged my human moments of weakness. "Sarah, you need to leave," David continued, his voice growing firmer. "This family doesn't want you here anymore." "Family?" Sarah's tone sharpened. "You mean the family that includes Claire's brother, who barely visits? Who wasn't around when she really needed support?" I felt Jake tense beside me. Sarah was now attacking David too, the one person who had actually shown up when it mattered most. "That's enough," David replied. "I'm calling the police if you don't leave right now." Through the window, I could see Sarah's posture change. The confident, manipulative stance wavered for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something else. Desperation, maybe even genuine hurt. But then her expression hardened again. "This isn't over, Claire," she called toward the house. "Those children deserve better than the chaos you've created. Mark can give them stability, opportunities you can't provide." The sound of her footsteps retreating should have brought relief, but instead, I felt hollow. Hearing her voice, the very arguments I'd feared most about my adequacy as a mother had shaken something fundamental in me. "She's getting in her car," Jake reported, still watching from the window. David remained outside until Sarah's car disappeared down the street. Only then did he knock gently on the door. "It's me." "She's gone." I unlocked the door with trembling hands. David stepped inside, his face etched with concern and anger. "Are you all right?" he asked, looking between the three of us. "No," I said honestly. "I don't think I am." Emma immediately went to David and hugged him. "Thank you for coming. She was being so awful." "I'm sorry you had to hear any of that," David said, returning Emma's embrace before looking at Jake, who was still standing by the window with his arms crossed. "Is what she said true?" Jake asked suddenly, his voice quiet but direct. "About Dad being able to give us more opportunities?" My heart stopped. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. That despite everything, the seeds of doubt Sarah and Mark had tried to plant might still take root. "Jake," I started, but he held up his hand. "I'm not saying I want to live with him, Mom. I'm just asking if it's true that we'd have more money and stuff if we did." David looked at me, letting me handle this crucial moment with my son. I took a deep breath, choosing honesty over defensiveness. "Your father does make more money than I do. He could probably give you things I can't afford. But money isn't the only thing that matters in a family." "I know that," Jake said, finally turning away from the window to look at me directly. "I just wanted to hear you say it instead of pretending like everything's always perfect." His words hit me with unexpected clarity. In trying to protect my children from my struggles, in trying to appear strong and capable at all times, I had sometimes made them feel like they couldn't acknowledge the realities of our situation. "You're right," I said. I do struggle sometimes. We do have to be more careful about money than we were before. But that doesn't mean our life is lacking in what's really important. Emma nodded firmly. We have each other. And we have Uncle David. And we're happy here, even if our apartment is smaller. And we have movie nights, and you help with our homework, and you actually listen when we talk. Jake added, his voice growing stronger. Dad never did that, even when we lived in the big house. David smiled at both kids. Your mom has given you something your father's money can't buy, a home where you feel safe being yourselves. Looking at my children, seeing their fierce loyalty despite the fear and confusion of the past weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Sarah's betrayal had shaken my confidence, but it had also revealed something important. My kids knew the difference between being provided for and being truly cared for. I think, I said slowly, we're going to be just fine. All of us, together. The next morning brought a call from my lawyer with news that Mark's custody petition had been withdrawn. Apparently, when confronted with evidence of his collusion with Sarah to gather information improperly, he decided not to pursue the case further. It was over, but the real victory wasn't legal. It was standing in my kitchen with Emma and Jake, watching David help them make pancakes while they argued good-naturedly about whether chocolate chips or blueberries were better. It was realizing that this loud, imperfect, loving chaos was exactly what my children needed. If you're going through something similar, remember that the people who truly belong in your life won't need to collect evidence of your struggles to use against you. They'll simply show up to help you through them. Trust your instincts, protect your peace, and never let anyone convince you that love isn't enough. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about navigating life's unexpected challenges.